This video is presented for historical and educational purposes only. World Documentary Archives strongly condemns hate speech, violence, and all forms of extremism.
So this is Berlin, the city that spawned many wars and 2 devastating world wars. The city of monuments. Yes, monuments to wars. Unhurt and undamaged in its previous wars, now ruined Berlin is all one monument. A grim monument to the war that in one form or another has vitally affected the lives of every living person on the face of the earth. This is the objective that men fought, bled, and died to get to. Now we are here, and it is hard to realize that the war is finished in Europe. Great authors, philosophers, men of letters will attempt to record this for history. Another qualified to tell the story is the foot-slogging soldier. He was there.
Well, here it was at last, an official. Germany had tossed in the towel. People were letting off steam and having themselves one whale at a time. The way I figure, they'd earned it. Standing on the corner and watching all the fun made me feel good. And yet somehow I couldn't get into the swing of it. I guess I felt mixed up inside. Kept thinking of all the things that had gone on before. All those months of training in the States. Training and, of course, marching. Seems like that went on all the time. Then one day somebody blew a whistle and we piled into a ship. Days later somebody blew another whistle and we piled off. Then we were training and marching all over again. Only now it wasn't Louisiana or Missouri. It was England. There were maneuvers and problems and then exercises. Funny thing about those exercises, you were always ready to bet that the latest one wouldn't be an exercise at all, that it would turn out to be the real thing. The company clerk heard it from the mess sergeant, who had it straight from the colonel's driver. Yes, this time it would be the real thing. No matter how many times you were wrong, you were always ready to bet on the next one. It was the real thing for the fellows in the Air Force. They were out mauling the enemy, tearing up his marshalling yards and depots, smashing his factories, knocking out everything that kept his machine running. Luftwaffe and ground batteries used to hit back. The Air Force kept right on dishing it out to them. All those months, supplies kept pouring in. Mountains of them. The English used to kid us about it and say their little island would break up and sink under all that weight. Big stuff like locos and tanks. Little stuff, too, like rations and cartridges. Everything an army uses, from paper clips to planes. Lots of planes. Tens of thousands with all their gadgets and equipment it takes to keep them flying. We needed a lot, too, because now the Nazi machine itself was to be hammered, and the Luftwaffe written off the books. Supply lines and communications ripped to bits. It wouldn't be long now. You knew that when you saw the southern coast. Dinghies and destroyers, corvettes and cruisers, anything that would float was out there waiting. This time when loading began, there wasn't any betting. Couldn't find any takers. This time it was the real thing. This was it. It felt good to be doing something after all that time hanging around the embarkation area. So good you didn't worry about what might happen next. Cheerio, chum. See you in Berlin. It was a tough job and complicated. Those Navy men sure knew how to handle it, but we hadn't seen anything yet. Then the hours began to add up. Hours like you used to put in when you were a kid sitting in a dentist's waiting room. A fellow who played an instrument or could do a few stunts didn't have to look hard to find an audience. Some of us just played cards or swapped small talk. And there were eager beavers, too. When they started briefing the Navy, we knew whatever was coming soon. And we had our own powwows, what each of us had to do, when and where we were to do it. Back at their inland bases, other GIs were getting ready to push off. The paratroops and the Airborne. Just when the guys figured out the deal on pounds and shillings, along comes francs and centimes. The stuff went fast. Maybe the boys figured they wouldn't be finding many bars or shops open for business. Pretty soon, men began to drop out of the games. The plywood buses were pulling up for the tourist train. Then the big boss himself showed up. A few words, the right words. Out where we were lying, more and more shipping was on the move. It looked like a traffic tangle to most of us, but then we were only landlubbers and wouldn't know. The go-ahead signal was given the men who waited in planes and gliders. A sky parade that went on from dark right through till dawn, and then on into the day. Island of mild and bitter, of weather they like to kid about, of tidy farms and narrow lanes, was getting smaller and slipping away. Then there wasn't any England at all. Only the channel far below, crisscrossed by our convoys. When we heard the motors or spotted them overhead, we knew it was time to stop counting those hours. Somebody joked about unleashing the dogs of war. There was nice courage in a cigarette. And in the air cover we'd all been hearing about and now could see for ourselves. And in the steel wall the Navy had put up around us. And in ourselves. That's why waiting wasn't as tough as lots of us had thought it was going to be. And then, it began. It was the Navy's show. But our own act was coming up. I was scared. Well, I was. We all were. Knowing that made things easier. This was what we'd been planning and training for. And so had the Germans. After a few seconds, maybe it was years, we hit the beach. We were still in it together, those of us who made it. It was the same on all the other beaches along that strip. We proved something, too. I mean, to ourselves. Now we meant to hold on. The men who had come by air had made their landings, but we wouldn't know the full story till later. Right then, we were sort of busy ourselves. Troops and Airborne had been hacking away at the enemy behind his lines. They'd taken their first prisoners before we landed and met up with their first friends. Taken their first trophies, too, that we Yanks call souvenirs. The Nazis had been pushed back, and along the beaches, man-made forts were mushrooming up. Into them were pouring supplies, material, manpower. Out of them were streaming the men who used to sing, "We Sail Against England." They were heading for England, all right, but nobody was singing. Our own men kept coming ashore, reinforcements for those who were pushing on, replacements for those who couldn't. Then the advance became a trail of smashed towns and crushed villages on the road to Cherbourg. The enemy knew we'd need a real fort to take the place of the sand strip landings. We'd have to blast them out, and that's what we did. People whose homes you had to flatten, it made you feel good to come across plenty who understood why. Who knew you came as friends. Kind of warfare called street fighting. There were scraps in the open. Then, one day it was over. The harbor forts at Cherbourg gave in, and a little less than a month after we'd started, the city was liberated. Our first real haul in top German brass surrendered to General Collins. We had an old-fashioned 4th of July with fireworks, or adult. And even a few speeches. The French were funny people. They celebrate their 4th of July on the 14th, and they call it Bastille Day. Bonjour, merci beaucoup, comme ci, comme ça. Well, this French lingo is a snap. But GI shoes just weren't made for dancing. And so we started out again. There's always got to be one life at a party. Sometimes it's a good thing. This party was what they called the Battle of the Hedgerows. Miles around. But it wasn't our idea of a good time. There was always a hedgerow behind you and one up ahead. And when you cleared the very last one, there'd be another one waiting. No, it wasn't our idea of a good time. Sometimes there were breaks. They might even last a day or two, and you could almost forget burp guns, 88s, and snipers. Almost. But not quite. Not if you had any brains under your iron hat. Church was where you made it. And religion meant more to the men who believed. I guess that was because we never knew what might be coming up next. What was coming up next? Well, this time it would be San Lo. An artillery barrage. Like marching with us, there was the same old routine for those fellas every time they set up. Maybe hours getting ready to fire 5 rounds, and all the while staying put in one spot, like clay pigeons. After the guns, armor and men going forward. Edging into the town itself. holding on, but not for long. And the Air Force coming in to hammer them loose from above. Trying to hang on to mounds of rubble and piles of wreckage. It'll be a good try, but only a try. Then Finis, and Saint-Lô added to that list of smashed villages and towns. Saint-Lô stopped being used, and it was Patton. Patton and his armor breaking out and running wild. The Third Army moving on wheels and tracks to join the Canadian 1st and British 2nd at Palais Trap. Us, we went on like before, using foot power. Someday I'm going to round me up some tank men. I'll let them pound shoe leather while I sit by and hand out the wisecracks. We'll see how they get along in a few lightning minutes for a break and a smoke, and then up on their feet again. That's what it was for us. We marched, mixed it up with the Heinies, then marched some more. We marched clear across France, marched right into Paris. Then we had a parade. Paris had been liberated, and Leclerc's men were still cleaning up the Boche who hadn't moved out fast enough. It was like a hometown welcome along the Champs-Élysées. There were ceremonies and speeches. The town was yours and everything was on the house. Just the place to settle down for a good time and a little rest. But no, we kept right on marching, right through the city and out again. Oh, my aching foot. There were other GI shoes pounding the French roads now. After a surprise Mediterranean landing, the 7th Army, fresh from action in Italy, had swept up the valley of the Rhone. Lyon had been liberated. For us, there were more towns with names you couldn't pronounce, and that all looked alike. Each one had to be taken first. And that's why they all came to it. Jerry was beginning to lose his taste for war. We could tell by the way he began coming in bigger groups, and minus some of his cockiness. He was taking a clouting wherever he stood to fight. Or where he tried to run away. He was learning how it feels to be on the receiving end, and he didn't like it. There was one batch of 20,000 gave up, along with all their equipment. That wasn't a bad day's work. Between jobs, we kept right on marching. France was behind us, and we were in Belgium, in Luxembourg, and in Holland. You could even hear that old line coming to life again. Home by Christmas. The enemy was folding, and you were beginning to get a bang out of this hero stuff. In fact, it was doggone nice. That's not all that was nice. Camp shows and lovelies from back home were catching up with us. Nice. The wolf pack thought so, too. Bing came over, and lots of others. It made us feel even closer to the end than to home. Ike and Monty had come around, and everybody knew something big was cooking. Maybe that knockout punch. The something big was an airborne invasion. Like civilians in the world outside, we held our breaths and waited for the news. The bridge at Nijmegen and the other 2 points of a triangle bounded by Arnhem and Eindhoven would give us a hold on the Rhine and the country beyond. The link-up of the British and General Dempsey's men, the defense of the Arnhem pocket, would become history. It was a hard one to lose, and it pulled us up short. Heine hadn't thrown in his chips yet. But there was good news to the south. For the first time, a major German city was getting its taste of battle. Assault by artillery and from the air was going to do for Aachen what has been done to all those little French towns and villages. War had come to Germany. It had stopped being a newspaper story about other people's homes. Because it was home, the crowds held on and fought back. And we, who had been marching, went into the town to tear them up. Tore them out, and that took care of Aachen. The refugees looked like all the others we had seen. Maybe some of us even felt a little sorry for them, because we didn't know then a lot of things we were going to learn later. After that, it was Metz, and a lot of towns just as hard to pronounce as those in France, and just as beat up. Then we came for Siegfried. It was slow going, but it could be done. We used new tools and new weapons, and we gave them the rocket treatment. Lots of Nazis decided life could be beautiful on the other side of those launches. It was up to us again. And so we put the Siegfried behind us and started on again, deeper into Germany. We weren't heroes now. We were hoodlums, gangsters, just like the Führer had said. All Germany felt that way about us, including the weather. Looking back, the English brand didn't seem so bad after all. Sometimes a fellow should have stood in bed and had his meal served there, too. The boss looked in on us again. He always seemed to show up when a visit would do the most good. Wherever they could, the Heinies used to help out the weather by pushing over a few dams. They always had reception committees waiting to welcome us. Maybe we played too rough, the way some of them carried on. Stop to apologize on account of we were busy and had to keep moving. One day we passed some nurses with a liberated sled. It was a reminder that the holidays were just around the corner, and the young man's mind just naturally turned to his winter wardrobe. The accent that season was on the conservative. Something in a double-breasted and neutral colors, just the thing for an afternoon stroll. Thanksgiving came, featured by dinner parties. K&C rations for most. But turkey, too, for the lucky ones. After dinner, everyone turned out to see Army play Army. Yeah, that sure was one gay holiday season. There was a strip of land called the Hirchen Forest that had to be fine-combed before we were out in the clear. It was still war, and nobody had proved that a man named Sherman was wrong. The holiday season was winding up, and if your outfit wasn't on the move, you made little plans. It was going to be as merry as you could make it, but nobody dug up that old one about home by Christmas. Most of us, a Merry Christmas never did come off. The Krauts had pulled another one out of the hat. The Ardennes breakthrough. our turn to give ground. Our turn to dig in and defend. Then give some more. People who had come back to their villages were on the roads again. The Boche was coming back. They knew what that would mean. Boche wasn't coming back. At a place called Bastogne, he was going to be stopped cold. He might try to wriggle through wearing our uniform, but it wouldn't work. He couldn't wriggle through and he couldn't blast his way through. He was stopped. Not only that, but he was going back where he came from. We were going over to the offensive and we were going to stay on it. We'd already paid a price to win would have to be won all over again. It sort of made you sick inside, but fighting sick, if that makes any sense. It did to us. It was slow going, and we were fighting for ground that could be measured in half acres. Sometimes no bigger than a truck farm or a garden plot. When it was over, you'd flop right down where you'd been scrapping for a few minutes breather. Then go on to clear another patch or push the Nazi down another hill. You could go out and fight an enemy who had a gun if you had a gun. But fighting winter was tougher. There was cold that froze a man who stayed put too long. Wet that rotted clothes and equipment, and snow that dragged you down. We fought out against the Nazis, and held on against the winter. The battle for half acres was winning back towns. And so we kept on, marching, of course. A full-scale offensive was growing out of the counterattack. The bulge was shrinking. We were going forward again, and that helped ease the ache of dog-tired feet, legs, and bodies. Everyone felt better about the way things were shaping up. Another thing made us feel better was the break in the weather. The snows were easing off, and the sun had found us again. That weather was just what the doctor ordered. Yeah, good old Doc Goebbels. We were still on the march, but the going had become a crawl. Some places we bogged down and stalled. Sure, the bulge was growing smaller and we were getting a good bag every day. But our own hitting power was shrinking too. The weather that Doc Goebbels had ordered was stopping us. The wheels that had to bring us equipment, ammo, medical supplies were stuck fast in mud. But von Rundstedt wasn't the only one who could pull tricks out of a hat. There wasn't mud up there, so the things we needed started to roll in by air transport. The weather the doc had ordered. And went on licking the crowds. It must have been a pretty good job, too, because pretty soon there was no more bulge. And the only heinies left were real well-behaved and didn't give us any trouble at all. There was a breather now while plans were made for the next move. We were going to cross a river that stood between us and, well, other rivers. Jerry on the other side was being softened up. What was left of the Luftwaffe was to be chalked off too. We liked that. It would make things easier for us, and even a lot easier wouldn't be easy enough. Something of those D-Day hours came back. We were all in it together. Sad sacks from the repo depots and old vets right out of Malden. Then we hurried up and waited. If you were smart, you caught up on a bit of shut-eye because there wouldn't be much sleep all that night. The artillery would see to that. Somebody started smoking French tobacco. And was doing a good job of it, too. Under that chemical blanket, the tubs could be hauled down to the river. The Roar didn't look like much of a river as rivers go, but it had been equipped with some pretty fancy cross currents and moved faster than a 48-hour pass. Folks on the other side weren't very friendly. They threw things at us and tried to keep us from landing, but we wanted to. And that's what we did.